Thanks, Alan. Hi again, everyone. If you've joined us more recently, I'm Catherine Cheney, Senior Editor for Special Coverage at Devex. And I'm joined by Uyi Stewart, who is the Chief Data and Technology Officer at data.org. Uyi, thank you so much for joining us. So we talk a lot and we report a lot at Devex on AI systems and their potential to transform global development, but some really problematic hurdles we have to overcome first, perhaps the most problematic being biased data collection. And in this conversation, I want to quickly hear from you about that problem and tease it out, but also talk about the responses to that problem. You're doing this work at data.org. Previously, you've worked for groups like IBM and the Gates Foundation on these challenges. But first, since we all have probably a different understanding of the problem, let's get on the same page. You have said that the main thing holding low-income countries back from taking advantage of this AI wave is the lack of digitization. So can you expand on this and also what can be done about it?
Absolutely. And thank you, Catherine, and for having me here. There are more than 7,000 languages in the world. And the whole phenomenon about AI or what, associated with LLMs is being powered and driven by two languages. So think about
English and Mandarin.
English and Mandarin. So from the outset, there is an inequity that is happening. But the better question is why? Well, because this technology is data hungry. And the developers of this technology, therefore, are voracious and looking for where to get the most available data. Well, the most available data is on the internet. And right away, we get a new form of digital divide. That languages that are available on the internet are now called high resource languages. And languages that are not available on the internet are called low resource languages. And the barrier is that the so-called low resource languages are not digitized because they are not on the internet. And that's the asymmetry that we have.
Now, while it's obvious to you, for those who are less plugged into this work on AI, what are the consequences of that?
It's dire. Actually, let me first speak to the technologists in the room. Because this is not spoken about enough. That LLMs and foundational models will continue to hallucinate. Why? Because developers of this technology have skipped an important step that requires local contribution. What does that mean? Let me just quickly give you a generative analogy. In human language acquisition, a child comes into the environment with innate predisposition to acquire a language. So there is a language base, a knowledge base for child language acquisition. In model development, we call that corpora. You have to develop the corpora. But in the race to acquire data, guess what? We're just going onto the internet, collecting the data and building models and skipping a very important part, which is the corpora development. But here's the catch. Corpora development cannot be developed in New York to work in Lagos, Nigeria, because it has to be localized. It has to be done by the citizens, by those who understand the language, the culture, the beliefs. And that's missing right now. And that's doing harm to the development of foundational and LLM models.
So you mentioned it has to be localized, and I want to narrow in on that for a second. So at data.org, you talk a lot about the need to lead with localism.
Yep.
And you've said we need to localize data,
Yep.
localize language,
Yep.
localize capacity.
Yep.
So can you expand on this? And while I understand the need, talk about how. How do we do that?
Yes. First, the how is the easy things are the most complex ones out there. We have to reimagine how we do data collection. Mm-hmm. Right now, just for historical reasons, we collect data based on textual availability. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the languages in Africa and in Asia are oral languages. They are people who speak their languages and are functionally literate in their languages. But these are not digitized. So the first thing we need to do as a community is to reimagine data collection to start to include speech, orality. That's missing right now. And when you have that, actually, there are lots of experiments that show that text data misses out on acoustic correlates of emotion. And so whatever models you build are still going to be flat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so at data.org, what we're doing is, in the spirit of localism, is to co-design and co-create with a local community. And there are three components of the local community we work with. One, universities. I think they've been left out, especially in the low middle income countries, in this rat race to the development of AI. They still remain the veritable institution for innovation, but it's just because of infrastructure and cost reasons they are not in it. What we do is to bring them into our ecosystem and then unite them with where innovation is happening. Where innovation is happening, especially in Africa, is in innovation hubs. Those little hubs, Data Science Nigeria, Co-Creation Hub, that's where AI is happening. And universities on its own. So we bring them into our ecosystem, we unite them with the AI hubs, and then it's important to bring in government. You need trust. Government brings in the people. That's how we work. That's the ecosystem that we're uniting and bringing together. One more thing. And then we create curriculum. See, it's important that it's not just to create an ecosystem, it's to have a means for the democratization of access and ability to do this over and over again in order to achieve scale.
So you mentioned working with governments. I know that data.org is working with Nigeria on specialized large language models. So can you paint that picture for us? What does that look like? And what do you both bring to the table?
It's exactly what I just said a few minutes ago. So our insistence is on the linguistic corpora development. So the government has already brought in expertise that is already doing model development. And, it's a rat race and everyone is trying to build his own LLMs, which is great. But we know that the critical first step really is to build out that linguistic corpora. Two things can be right up at the same time. And that's what we are learning. Build out these LLMs based on available data, do what you do, but we will now build capacity to create this linguistic corpora that makes the LLMs robust so that, and here's the catch, so LLMs will hallucinate if you do not have a linguistic corpora. Like I said, that's how humans learn language. Let me give you a quick analogy. When a child is learning a language and they make an error, mom is going to say, no, you say this. Child's going to say, forget you. Right? It's not what mom says because there is a grammar, there's an underlying corpora that a child works with. It's natural. We're missing that in our development process. And what's happening is that LLMs will hallucinate if there isn't that foundational corpora that is created. And that's what we're doing, building out the A to Z steps of how you build out corpora, training citizens in the community because they know the language, they know the culture, they know the beliefs to encode that into the digitization process.
So in the start of this conversation, you mentioned that if we don't take this kind of action, we will end up in a world in which the languages in large language models and the languages that are the basis of AI will be English and Mandarin.
That's right.
So in terms of what more is needed, there's the work that data.org is doing, but what more is needed? You have called for a global coalition to digitize languages and build local capacity, which is another key thing, to ensure that AI serves the global majority.
That's
so
right.
You've called for this. We only have about a minute left here. How's it going? What's happening? And any call to action for this group?
Breaking news.
Oh, really?
Yes. So tomorrow, through the generous support of MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, at 8:15 a.m., we're launching this global coalition. And so we have colleagues and parts of the ecosystem from Africa, from India. Manu is not in the room, but we have this coalition kicking off tomorrow. It's going to take a whole army to have this done. There are 7,000 languages. Multiply that by 10 in terms of dialectal variation. And so what we need to do in order to make this possible is to build out this coalition. And our role is to create the playbook, the step-by-step process of making this happen. We put it in the hands of this coalition and then set them loose. One more thing.
Sure.
We know that one of the 7 innovations that has changed the world is the printing press. It is not so much the printing press itself. It's what it was able to do. that it democratized access to knowledge. And out of that spawned commerce and so on and so forth. That's the model we're trying to replicate here. And that's what we're calling for this global coalition around digitization so that we can get to the next wave of our evolution.
Well, we always love to break a little news on stage here at Devex. So thank you, Uyi, for outlining the stakes and for your work on this. And we're excited to follow this coalition. Please join me in thanking Uyi.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.